Before I start off this video, I would like to thank everyone for helping me reach 300 subscribers. When I started this channel, I never thought anyone else but me would enjoy watching these videos, and therefore I appreciate every single like, share and comment. Also, if you want to stay updated on each release, follow me on Instagram and subscribe. Now, at first glance, you and I, who probably are big fans of the show, wouldn't categorize Thomas Shelby as a shameful person. After all, he walks with a straight posture, he possesses a commanding voice, and rarely loses eye contact with even the most frightening or domineering people one could possibly meet. However, as previously discussed in my first video, Tommy isn't much different from you and I when it comes to struggling with one's own mind. And throughout the series, there's a certain amount of shame Tommy carries towards his vulnerability and lack of control. It all stems from two different versions of Tommy that we get introduced to. Tommy before the war and Tommy that came out of the war. The Tommy before the war was loyal to a cause, a public servant, someone who trusted in the greater good. He could wait hours on hours just to meet a woman and give his life to the country he served. We don't know a whole lot about the Tommy before the war, but we hear different stories about him having a soft glow over his eye, enjoying playing with horses and smiling a lot. All in all, we have a Tommy that before the war had strong beliefs and wanted to follow the natural course of life, fighting for his country, following orders and doing what he was told, because that's what a good law-abiding citizen should do, or so he initially thought. But all that changed after the war ended, and he and the rest of his war comrades were spit back into society and expected to just forget all the horror and trauma they suffered and just attempt to go back to everyday life without any emotional support or financial help. This is the timeline where a lot of Tommy's shame and resentment grew from. We are all familiar with the notion that Tommy always wanted something better for himself, and throughout his own journey to success, he always kept the belief that he and his family deserved more than what they were given in life. That's partly why we admire him so much. In the first video I made about Tommy, I mentioned a short story about how he once upon a time bought a pineapple and a top hat with the family's grocery money for the week. This supposedly took place when Tommy was very young and still poor, and when Tommy came back home with the pineapple and a top hat, quite similar to when he came back from the war in France, he got punished. Tommy's mother beat him with a frying pan and punished him unintentionally or not for trying to look beyond the metaphorical fence that surrounded the family's economical potential at the time. Similar to how the war in France punished and took away the joy and belief Tommy had before serving his country. Tommy's mother intentionally or inadvertently conditioned young Tommy to believe that daring to envision a life of opulence and prosperity was somehow wrong. That putting his faith and trust in the British establishment instead of questioning why was a foolish act.
How the f*** did a man like you get into a position of trust in a place of power and privilege? Man like me. Shelby!
That rebelling against the system was an impossible job, and that not accepting the lot in life that the Shelby family was given should be smacked out of him and replaced with shame. People who come from lower class families are often painfully aware of how differently they are treated and tend to suffer in silence from social stigmatism.
Learned something in the last few days. Those bastards are worse than us. Politicians, judges, lords and ladies are worse than us, and they will never admit us to their palaces. No matter how legitimate we become, because of who we are. Because of who we are, because of where we're from. Isn't that right, Ada?
They are aware of the fact that they're not like the other people around them, especially if they, like Tommy, come from a minority group such as being a gypsy that is often shunned and looked down upon.
Your mother was probably born in a tent.
Grandmother in a tent. My mother on a narrowboat.
And always happy to give smart answers to men born better than you.
A man needs to prove he is better than me, rather than show me his birth certificate. See, I don't have one, so they mean very little to me.
They, for example, can't enjoy the same quality of food or have the same quality of clothes like other children around them. All they have is hope and shame. But shame has many sources. Sometimes a person is plagued by feelings of shame without a clear cause. This is more common among people with mental health diagnosis. Some studies have linked conditions such as depression and social anxiety to shame. In the light of diagnoses such as depression and social anxiety, mental health conditions remain stigmatized even today, but even more so during the early 20s when Peaky Blinders supposedly took place. A person experiencing shame due to a mental health condition may continually become more ashamed of themselves and their condition, exacerbating symptoms and making it difficult to seek help. The fact that Tommy bought an exotic fruit and a fancy hat shows how ambitious and far-seeing he was from a very young age. Tommy's vision for something bigger in life was always there, even though the path for it wasn't yet clear. Is one of the reasons why I really enjoyed it when Tommy says one of my favorite lines.
But Mr. Devlin, I'm not a traitor to my class. I am just an extreme example of what a working man can achieve.
And from there on, Tommy's persona takes a complete change. The shame that previously held him hostage to a subordinate mentality suddenly turned into purposeful fuel and a relentless ambition towards the upper echelons of society.
Tommy, does your ambition have no limits?
The perception of him drastically changed from being viewed as a loyal servant in the army to later appearing on the radar of the king of the British royal family. From that sudden transition, Tommy starts to thirst to be infallible, showing everyone his god complex is justified.
Did Arthur explain?
He said it's God's will. But you're not God.
No, I'm not God. Not yet.
And it's in around this timeline of Tommy's progression where the line between Tommy being right or wrong starts to fade into each other. Even when he's wrong, even when he sacrifices his family for the bigger picture to what seems to be for the greater good, the actual truth is that he does it out of his fear and shame of failure. Failure to make a misstep in front of all of his newfound peers. The fear of not coming off as always being in control of everything that happens around him.
What do I have to do to make people listen to me?
What do we do now, Tommy?
Even though the notion of being in control of the uncontrollable is an impossible task in itself. And finally, the fear of never arriving to his goal, which is failing to carry his family to the promised land.
So close. So close. Nearly got fucking everything!
Even though Tommy's promised land seems to be a goalpost that is constantly moving as soon as he gets closer to it. Having said all of that, I still think Tommy genuinely always wanted what was best for his family, but as time went on, it all got jumbled in his head. While the younger version of Tommy was ashamed of being poor, the grown-up version of Tommy is ashamed of being emotionally vulnerable, so he tries to block out the thoughts and emotions as soon as they occur, often with alcohol and drug-related substances. We all know by now that the addiction to strong substances runs deep in Tommy's family tree, and I believe that Tommy is addicted to not only drugs, but also the pursuit of power itself.
You reflected on the fact that working people can indeed change their lives for the better. Channel their abilities in new directions, discover better methods, aim for happier outcomes, even win awards for industry. You can write this down, Mr. Levitt.
This longing and yearning to power slowly turns into a lifelong quest of the pursuit of happiness, a pursuit that is also tainted with a lot of resentment towards the elitist people of the world, who in Tommy's opinion got their power easily, cheaply and undeservingly. Through Tommy's point of vision, we're shown heartache and misery. We're shown the ugly and very real sides of someone struggling with shame, resentment, and comorbid mental illness. Comorbidness, for those of you who don't know, describes two or more conditions appearing in a person. The mental conditions that a person might be struggling with can occur at the same time or one right after the other. But we're also shown an awakening, an enlightenment of the worst sort. In the times Tommy is living in, nothing is sacred or to be trusted.
We have, in this place, children of the worst sort. They lie as easily as breathe.
You had a child half black. You made her wash with a different soap.
Mr. Shelby, your own sins are legend.
Our sins.
Our sins against the beating of children with bricks and houses. Our sins against the black child who hanged herself for fear of your temper.
Not his country, not the government he's living under, not the god or gods he believes in, not even the houses of worships he attends. It's almost like he feels like he's stuck in a world where whenever something positive happens to the lower class person, it is systematically ripped away from him or her. And as a lower class citizen, one is expected to just sit on his thumbs and accept that this is the way life is supposed to pan out. To put it in another way, having experienced those hopeless feelings and thoughts himself for many years, these deep-rooted feelings spurred Tommy's need for more. They are the seeds which were planted in his childhood and bloomed to help shape Tommy become the ruthless and power-hungry gangster that we all know. Nevertheless, running away from pain and shame can in a lot of times be a more powerful motivation than running towards glory and fame. And more often than not, when Tommy can't get what he wants, he takes it. Shamelessly, one could say.
Oh, right. For Christ's sake, why?
Hey!
Why?
Why? Because we can! Because we can! And if we can, we do!
As we're examining Thomas Shelby's psychological profile through the framework of shame, we have to remind ourselves that the interpretation of shame can easily be misconstrued with the feeling of guilt. Although guilt may be an emotion that also greatly affects Tommy's life, it is not the exact same thing as shame. Guilt is usually understood to involve negative feelings about an act one has committed that involves an awareness that our actions may have hurt someone else. Shame, on the other hand, involves negative feelings about oneself, also known as a negative view on different aspects of one's own self-concept. And although a person can be shamed by peers or society in general, shame can also be experienced secretly. Unresolved shame can lead to feelings of depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Shame may also be a symptom of a traumatic experience, such as seeing people you love and who you would do anything to protect helplessly die right in front of your own eyes. Living with shame, regardless of the shame's source, can be a lonely, tiring, and demoralizing experience. Research consistently shows that shame can have a catastrophic effect on one's mental health and behavior. Feelings of shame have been linked to suicidal actions and gestures, which is something we have seen Tommy exhibit throughout the show. Shame may also deter people from seeking treatment for their mental health issues or make it difficult for people to apologize for their own wrongdoings. Shame may last for a brief time, or it may be a core experience of the self. For people like Tommy, their feelings of shame began during their childhood and continued well into their adulthood. Some of us relate to that feeling and are conscious of such feelings already existing within us, while others may be unaware of their shame and hide it under behaviors such as addiction, anger, or narcissism, just like we see Tommy do countless of times. And sadly, other people respond to shame by engaging in self-harm, like Tommy's big brother Arthur.
I know who I am and I'm alright with it. Finally.
Living with shame can be painful and difficult, as it can prevent people from meeting their own core needs, such as the maintenance of self-esteem, hope for the future, friendship, intimacy, love. For Tommy, the shame he experienced is hidden from plain view and packaged as ambition, ruthlessness, and calmness. The problem is that Tommy is not calm. In fact, Tommy is in a constant state of arousal. He can't sleep at night.
I need to sleep. Just think, Tom.
He's always looking over his shoulders and he's always scheming of ways to protect himself and all the things he believes are rightfully his. Tommy also displays a lot of shame when he's being outwitted by more cunning people. The fact that he's been strong-armed by many of his adversaries eats at him, but he keeps a lid on it. He doesn't share when he's being used by his rivals. Instead, he isolates himself to guard himself from being viewed as weak by the people who depend on him.
Ada, if anything happens to me today, I need you to post this letter.
Look, Tommy, whatever it is you're involved in, just tell us. God, you never let anybody in. We love you, Tom.
To control the narrative in his own favor, Tommy pulls away mentally and emotionally to create a distance between him and his family in order to strategically feed pieces of the entire truth about his encounters, endeavors, and misfortunes in an altered sequence that puts him in a driver's seat. By doing so, he makes his family think he's the one in charge of the situation, even when it's not entirely the case. The few times we get to see Tommy emotionally vulnerable, he hides away. He doesn't want people to see his raw emotions, which he's very shameful over. He doesn't want people to know he's vulnerable. However, as time goes on, it becomes harder, if not impossible, for him to conceal his cracks. Tommy is also ashamed of fear. Anytime he fails or think he might fail, he just clamps down harder. He schemes more in order to perfectly execute his plans. Perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels thoughts like, if I look perfect and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame, which I believe Tommy silently struggles with throughout the entire show. To close out this video, I would like to make a small comment on the many times we see Tommy gesture or allude to longing for death and suicide.
And Arthur, tell my boy that sometimes death is a kindness.
In my view, suicide is not really a wish for life to end, but more so the only viable way a person who's beginning to feel powerless can find in order to make everyone else look away from his shame. The wish is not to die, but to hide.